Greetings. This is Paranormal M, where mysteries come to life. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay in the loop. Get ready to question the reality you thought that you knew. My friend confirmed all of my experiences. So just some background. I'm a 19-year-old female, and I fully believe in ghosts and the paranormal. Oftentimes, I find myself going down rabbit holes where I read stories and watch videos about ghosts and cryptids. Of course, I also get hallucinations quite often. Stuff like people calling my name, seeing people standing in the corner of rooms, hearing echoes of my voice. Just stuff like that. From what I've gathered, it's genetic. Since some of the women, specifically my genetic line like my mom, my grandmother, and my aunt, they've always said that we were more sensitive to spirits. And due to this, we often do cleansing rituals. I do believe that they do something, but I'm never 100% sure. Since it's dead-ass just easier to believe it's hallucinations than it is to believe I'm haunted or something. At least, that way it's just affecting me. Anyways, with that all out of the way, I can actually talk about my most recent experiences. This happened a few days ago, in the days leading up to Halloween. I had the house to myself, since my family went on a camping trip, and I wanted to stay home to watch the dogs. Once my family left, my friends came over and we were all hanging out, getting ready to go see the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Once we all got back, we decided to turn in for the night. Fast forward a day later, and everyone except one of my friends had to go home, since they had work and classes. For this story, we'll call them Finch. Finch and I were hanging out real late at night, just playing video games, reading and chatting. Eventually it hit 2 a.m. and we heard this bang downstairs. As usual, I ignored it. I chalked it up to another hallucination. But then they asked, "You heard that too, right?" Freaked me out, since my first thought was, "Fuck, someone broke in." But then I realized the dogs weren't barking, not even the yappy-ass dog. After working up the courage, I went downstairs, found all the drawers in the living room open. They were all closed before we went upstairs. Even stranger, nothing else was out of place. Doors and windows were locked, alarm was set, stove was off, just as we left it when we retired to my room a few hours earlier. With no evidence to truly worry about, we just closed the drawers and went upstairs. We just hung out until I eventually fell asleep. About an hour later, Finch woke me up, asking if my house was haunted. I asked why. They said that they heard someone repeating what they said in our conversation prior to me falling asleep. And on top of that, they heard footsteps. I said, it's probably just my cat John. He's a big boy. He can sound like a person sometimes. But they pointed out that he'd been sleeping on my chair since we came into the room. We didn't really do anything about it, chalked it up to, well, that's weird. Eventually, Finch fell asleep with me, and we slept without much interruption. The next morning, we got up and chilled some more. Eventually, they fall back asleep, and I figured now was a good time as any to clean up the house before my family gets back. As I'm cleaning, I decide to make breakfast for us, so I go upstairs and ask if they want any. When I come in, they're fast asleep. It takes me a while to wake them up, too. When I ask, they say no and go back to sleep, passing out almost immediately. I go back downstairs and make a fried egg over rice. Then I heard noises again, like someone was walking around upstairs. Once again, I figured it was John, but then I realized he'd been sitting at the counter this entire time. Then I reasoned it was Finch, but they were fast asleep. Whatever it was none of my business, so I just got back to the food. Once it was done, I made too much and brought some up for them as well. When I came in, they were still asleep. So now I knew for sure it couldn't have been them. Even if they got up to use the bathroom, the footsteps went on far too long, and it even went into my mother's room, which no guests are allowed in. Finch is extremely respectful of this, so I know damn well they aren't in there. While we're eating, they mentioned that they were having a very strange dream. A little boy about 12 with strawberry blonde hair, a long face, and a cheery disposition came in with my mom to look around my room. They said even though the little boy was bubbly, something felt off about him specifically. Normally I'd just call this a weird dream and move on, but I was supposed to have a younger brother. Due to complications I won't be going into, he's no longer with us. I never knew what he would look like, nor how old he was, but my mom says he stays to watch over us. Usually when that kind of stuff just happens to me, which is kind of super often, I just call it a hallucination and I move on. But this is Finch. Finch doesn't have a family history of hallucinations or paranormal experiences. They didn't even believe in the supernatural until very recently. The fact these all happened very closely to one another with another witness is just strange. Now that I'm typing this all out, it sounds like many of the ghost stories I've heard. I pretty much just wanted to type this out just to get it out there. Any thoughts on it are welcome. My friend who didn't believe in ghosts until recently, and I, who commonly has hallucinations, although now I'm wondering if they're all hallucinations, had some weird experiences when we were home alone. Opened drawers that were for sure closed with no one to open them. They heard someone repeating that they had said, earlier voices and lots of footsteps with no source and weird dreams. But I'm just recapping the previous thing that happened. I teleported. I can't quite remember how old I was. Maybe 5-ish. I have this super vivid memory, and I can't quite make sense of it. My mom just brought it up tonight, and it was crazy hearing it from her perspective. One night when I was 5 or so, we had some family friends over with their kids. We had an underground room under the house. It was like a basement and a spare bedroom area. All of us kids loved playing in the quote-unquote downstairs room. That night we built a fort with some mattresses and blankets. The family friends went home later that night, and I remember my mom tucking me into bed. We had a whole goodnight routine for all of my teddies, and so they wouldn't feel left out. I fell asleep in my bed. I woke up later in the night because I felt cold. I was in the blanket fort in the downstairs room. I bolted awake. I was so scared of the dark and I was so confused as to how I got there. The downstairs room had a bit of an eerie vibe on a good day, and this night it was so dark and cold. It felt like I was being watched and closed in on, like the same panic you get when you run up the stairs real quick at night. I bolted out of the downstairs room up to the ground level, where the backyard was, and then up the back stairs to the back door. I was sobbing and screaming and pounding at that back door. I woke my whole house up, parents and sister. So my parents rushed to the door to unlock it. They double-checked the door and windows, and everything was closed and locked. Everything locks from the inside. My mom brought it up tonight. We've talked about it before a bit in the past, but I asked her what she remembered. She put my sister and I into bed, and she said that she woke up to me banging on the back door and screaming. My parents got me inside, tucked me in again after a lot of comfort and snuggles. Mom said that she was sure, sure that she tucked me into bed and that she had no idea how or why I got outside when the whole house was locked. Also, I'd never do that as a 5-year-old. The house we were living in at the time had a bit of a spiritual presence, you could say. Real weird, unexplainable things that have happened, but nothing scary or malicious. Just making themselves known, or perhaps residual hauntings. It's only happened once or so each time, but we had unexplainable and very clear footsteps and knocking and full-body apparitions and other weird things happen. I did sleepwalk a bit as a child. Maybe that's an explanation. But also, how did I get out of the house when all the doors and windows were locked? And only can lock from the inside, mind you. There's no way I had the cognitive ability to lock up after myself and have a key and the windows locked from the inside at 5. For my own sanity, I've been trying to make sense of this, because of the alternative being like a real kick in the pants. I'm thinking more of a paranormal experience, which is also... So, my question for you is, what the fuck happened? How could I have gotten out of the house and ended up in the mattress fort that we built in the downstairs room? Ask Reddit. I live in Vermont, pretty close to the Canadian border. My family owns a good chunk of mountain behind our house. I've always loved hiking up our mountain and camping out. But after several instances of being far too close for comfort with coyotes and bears at night, I decided to build a small shack for camping in. I built it my freshman year of high school, and it certainly was nothing to write home about. It was basically a log cabin made from only moose maple, which sick to kind of build with, and completely encased in roofing to prevent rain from blowing through the cracks between the logs. That's the backstory. The camp became pretty popular as a spot for my friends and I to hang out and shoot guns and blow stuff up, because it was like 10 miles away from any significant settlement. While it was certainly liberating being in the middle of nowhere, we all knew it was just us to get to safety if anybody of us got injured up there. So I'll start with the story. I asked one of my close friends to go on a camp out on Friday night after school. We'd been friends since middle school, so he had been up there multiple times before. After hiking up and roasting some hot dogs on a fire while listening to some chill music, it was dark. Whenever it gets dark on these campouts, you can always hear wildlife, I thought. You'd hear it running around the woods surrounding the fire. I always thought it was creepy, but after a long time with no bad encounters with wildlife, I felt pretty okay with the situation every night I was up there. And it more or less just became a neat occurrence while camping out. I always was armed with some sort of gun going up there for protection, so I never felt that scared. Anyways, after having our fill, we decided to go into the camp and get some sleep. In the camp, which is a 10 by 12 foot space, there was one homemade bunk bed, some floor space and a countertop and a small wood cook stove. I took top bunk and my friend took bottom. We both fell asleep pretty quickly, but awoke simultaneously at what I would guess to be around 1 a.m. to the sound of a church choir right outside the camp. It sounded like 30 or 40 people singing, and it was resonating inside my head. I could distinctly make out some Latin words, but I could never piece together what was being said. I turned down to my friend and asked if his phone was on. He said it was dead. The creepiest part about this is, well, after reflecting on it, was that we were perfectly calm, if If anything, it was super soothing, and eventually we both fell asleep. In the morning, we just both checked around the camp and, well, we didn't see any sign of anyone, let alone 40 people. We were 10 miles away from a town. To this day, I have no clue what happened, but I commonly refer to the singing as the angels because of how angelic it sounded. I think about it all the time, but it hasn't happened to me again since. I'm just glad I have someone to corroborate the story with, or else people would just think I was insane. Ask Reddit. I went to stay with my dad for a few days at his house. His house is in Mississippi. It's an older craftsman home built in the 40s. I stayed up late one night. Late for me is like 9 p.m. I was in the living room watching TV on the recliner while my dad was slowly dozing off in his bedroom. While watching TV, a plastic chewing gum wrapper shot across the floor about 5 feet. I found that odd, so I looked to see if the fan was on. Nope. Listened to see if the central heat or the air kicked on or off. Nope. Checked to see if windows were open. Nada. Nothing to my knowledge could have explained how that wrapper seamlessly shot across the floor. During the time I'm trying to analyze what moved the wrapper, my dad's dog, who was sleeping on the ground next to me, woke up, started growling in the direction of where the wrapper stopped moving. The dog then jumped up on the recliner with me, continued growling toward that direction. I noticed he was visibly shaking from fear, which heightened my anxiety, because I was just wasn't like him. I had had enough. Ran into my father's room to tell him what had happened. He rather calmly explained that the previous owner passed away from a heart attack in the living room, implying that it may have been his ghost. I lived in that house as a preteen and a teen for 7 years. I didn't know that tidbit of info, nor had any similar events occurred. My younger brother came home an hour or so later from visiting friends, and I explained the weird experiences to him. He was like, "Oh yeah, the house is totally haunted." Apparently he had his share, I guess you could say, of odd noises and unexplained footsteps in the house. My father renovated the house over 20 years ago. Has also come across things that he can't explain. So every time I visit, I now get an uneasy feeling. Ask Reddit. I'm a big believer in the paranormal, whereas my husband thinks everything is explainable. I've heard something walking down the hallway between our bedrooms a few times. He swears he's never heard it, and that it's just the house settling. Although many friends staying over, they've been pretty thoroughly scared. One night, maybe a year or two ago, I had a horrible nightmare. And in that nightmare, I heard the footsteps in the hallway, so I sat up in bed. I saw a little boy with missing eyes screaming and gasping for air. He fell from the ceiling and was crawling toward us screaming, with his eye sockets bleeding. He was mostly decomposing. I woke up completely sweating and shaking, only to have my husband jump up freaking out. He said he had a horrible nightmare. He was visibly really upset. It was the most upset I think I've seen him to this day. He never, ever has nightmares. So I told him to tell me about it, to help work through it so he could go back to sleep. And guess what? It was the exact fucking dream, down to the eyes and the screaming. I was actually so scared it took me a few minutes to say anything. I finally told him that I had the same dream, shared details, there's no way either of us could have known on our own. No scary movies, no scary stories, nothing to trigger it. Neither of us went back to sleep that night. Still freaks me out. Ask Reddit. Back in 5th grade, 2017, I was in an after-school program. I liked to draw and would look for random blank papers to draw on. One day I had finished a drawing, placed it on a table, and went home for the day. When I came back the next day, somebody told me that someone vandalized my drawing. It was scribbled all over. When I asked who did it, nobody knew who it was. I shrugged it off, but I was kind of upset. That was the first time. The second time was maybe a couple of days after. I don't exactly remember. This time I was at home, at least 8 o'clock. I was drawing fan art in a notebook I found. At least 7 to 8 pages. I was proud of how they came out. I left the notebook on the coffee table and went to sleep for the night. When I came back, all of those drawings were vandalized, scribbled and written all over in each page. The only person I knew was my little brother, so I asked him about it. He said he didn't do it. It was believable because he never vandalized my drawings before. I wrote in the notebook, "Who are you?" I didn't touch it until the next day. When I turned the page, the mysterious person replied something along the lines of, "You know who I am." I was very confused, especially since this person didn't specify. While I would probably be freaked out, at least I knew who was ruining my work. The third time was back at the after-school program, probably a few days later. I was drawing as usual and went home a bit after. I placed the paper on a desk before I left. When I came back to the drawing, it was vandalized again, but this time with a written message. "Never talk to me again." I was honestly scared. There was nobody I knew in that program who hated me to that extent. I would know that because kids who didn't like me would make it pretty obvious. I asked who it was again. Still, nobody knew. I had started to believe I was being haunted by a ghost or spirit. That was the last time an event like that occurred. I'm in 9th grade now, and I still have no idea who that person was. And I still think about it sometimes. Ask Reddit. When I was a child, I was staying the day with my 2 cousins while our mom was just out running errands. One cousin was my age, and we would play together, and the older one was like 18 and was babysitting us. They lived in a very old plantation home out in the middle of nowhere. They had no neighbors and owned tons of land. Their driveway was around half a mile long, so you were really alone out there at their house. Me and my younger cousin were sitting in the kitchen at the table having cereal, while my older cousin stood at the corner washing dishes. There was a window facing the driveway above the sink. We heard a woman loudly call out, "Lucy!" Older cousin's name. We also heard a honk. We assumed it was our moms, so my younger cousin and I took off running to hide from them, as we weren't done playing, and I didn't want to have to go home yet, honestly. We hid behind the couch for about 5 to 10 minutes, and no one ever came inside, so we became kind of curious. We stepped outside onto the front porch where my older cousin Lucy was. We asked where our mothers were, and she looked confused. Said no one was here. Lucy was pretty freaked, I guess, because we stayed outside together the rest of the day until our moms returned. Ask Reddit. This happened to me, my brother-in-law, and my aunt in 3 different rooms of my house. I was sleeping in my room. I woke up in the middle of the night to see a woman in a white dress with large black hair asking me, "Are you cold?" I just said yeah, thinking it was my mom or my sisters. She tucked me in and I went back to sleep. The next day I go ask everyone in the house if somebody went into my room to tuck me in. But they said no, nobody went there. I tell my aunt. She told me that the same thing happened to her, except that she noticed that she didn't know the woman, and she just covered her face. In that same house, my sister heard a man's voice right next to her ear when she was going to sleep. Every day you could hear people running around the house, moving stuff. And the most scary thing that happened was that my sister was studying with a friend and my brother-in-law, and the 3 of them saw a dwarf thingy running in the backyard of my house. Finally, my mom contacted a woman. She talked to my mom first. They didn't know each other and had no way of knowing anything about us. The woman starts asking her questions, like, "What's your name? How old are you?" And then she asks my mom, "How many kids does she have?" My mom says 3. The woman says, "No, you have 4 kids. The oldest one died when you had a 3-month pregnancy." My mom was shocked. Then the woman started to describe our house. She'd never been there. Finally, she went to our house, told us that there were 3 different portals in my house. One of them in my room, which was always cold, by the way, and told us that there were 2 ghosts, a man and a woman, that they came to my house because they saw that kid, which was me. I was playing alone. They went there to play with me. She then started to kind of exorcise my house. After she was done, the running stopped. We never heard or saw anything again. My room was also never cold. Ask Reddit. I've always lived in a haunted house or haunted dorms, and I currently have a spooky roommate in my apartment. When I was in middle school, like 7th grade I think, my mom, sister, and I moved into this old shotgun house down the street from a recycling plant and a factory. Behind the house was a swampy area with a big gravel circle and a garage. To the left and down were 2 houses from the garage was like an old barn. One day my sister and I were walking my Doberman and our 2 pit bull puppies. We passed the old barn and saw an old man standing in the hayloft. He waved at us, so we waved back, kept walking back toward our house. A few days later we were playing in our outdoor bunny pen with 2 of our rabbits, and we hear whistling. So we look over and see this old man standing in the hayloft. This time he had an older Doberman-looking dog with him. He waved and smiled. We waved back. A week or so goes by, and we had just been telling her mom about the old guy that she'd been, telling us about. Well, that's nice. And she brushes us off. We decided we were going to go for another walk with our dogs, see if we could talk to this old guy. We go to the barn, and it's just a pit in the floor. There was no ceiling, a floor for the hayloft. We were puzzled, but kept looking around. Dumbass poor kids need to be hooligans. We saw a rope hanging from the rafters and heard someone yell, "Hey!" So we get the hell out of there. We bump into our neighbor on our way back to our house and explain everything that's happened. He looks at us and nods, then tells us that there was an older guy who lived in the house and shared the property with the barn. And one day he was fired from his job at the town steel factory. He ended up hanging himself in the barn. We were creeped out, but we weren't scared or anything. The house we were living in was full of spooks. We were terrified of the one who lived in the bedroom. Read the unfinished, uninsulated attic. So one smiling, waving old man wasn't too scary for us. We'd still see the old man when we went for walks or played with our bunnies. He'd always wave, and we'd always wave back. Ask Reddit. The first one. I had a dream. To this day, it is tied to being the most vivid dream I've ever had. In the dream, I was walking with a group of people down into a deep cave. To my right of the wall of the cave, to my left a deep hole that was so deep you couldn't see the bottom. We're walking on a narrow path between the wall and the hole. After walking for a while, sort of lazily spiraling downward, we turned slightly to the right, as opposed to a downward, leftward spiral. We see this carved statue that looked very much like an old stone carving of an ancient god, but it was huge and carved out of the wall of the cave, Mount Rushmore style. It was separating us from the carving. Well, rather what was separating us from the carving was a huge cavern. At this point I hear a voice say, "Cannot stop me." And me as a cocky little prick says, "Watch me." I jump into the cavern and fall. I land in what I would like to say is a classical depiction of hell, maybe a Mario Bowser-like castle landscape. I'm running through some flames and find a person. I couldn't see his face, but I knew him. I grabbed his arm and he and I ran the hell out, jumped some iron gates. I wake up, I hear the voice again, open my eyes, and there's a dark shadowed figure standing over me. I can't move. Feels like someone's pushing down on my arms and legs. I can barely breathe. The figure moving slightly as if it realized I was awake and jumped backward into the corner of my room and just stands there until the sun starts coming up. This encounter is probably sleep paralysis, but the fact that the shadowy figure didn't go away after I'd fully woken up and could move, never left my bed, I was too afraid, leads me to think otherwise, sort of. Secondly, years after that first dream, 3 nights in a row I have recurring dreams. The first instance of the dream, I'm laying on the floor in the room where my brother's sleeping. He's in a bed and I'm sleeping on the floor. I'm looking down on us from above. In the dream, I see the cloaked figure that I saw after the first dream, like real life, and I described, and he draws a knife and goes to kill my brother. I wake up and stop it just before he does it. This dream happened 3 times in the same night. I have this dream again the next night, except this time in the dream and in life, I'm sleeping on the floor of my friend's dorm room. In the dream, I'm looking down on us before he's sleeping on the floor next to me instead of the bed like in real life. And in this dream, the same figure tries to kill my friend and I stop him. This again happens 3 times in that same night. Third time I have this dream, forget where I was in real life, but in the dream I was awake, it was bright out. I was standing in the marketplace like a courtyard area, lots of stone buildings and the road was cobblestone. I see through a dense crowd that same dark cloaked figure holding a knife and chasing someone. I run after him and he disappears, but I grab someone I didn't recognize. I woke up after each of these dreams each time they occurred. 3 times each night, 3 nights in a row. When I woke up, I'd feel like I was being watched, but wouldn't ever see anything. Ask Reddit. My wife and I were living in Oregon. We found a cute little house for rent off the main roads in the sticks a little bit. It's super old and small and up on a hill. It overlooks a fair amount of land, completely surrounded by massive Oregon trees. Simply beautiful. However, the house itself was apparently built by hand, by a guy that the locals considered a hermit several decades ago. Apparently, the guy was a bit of a Nazi extremist, conspiracy-driven, World War III doomsday prep type. So much so that we found these crazy trap doors all over the house. There was a false floor in one of the closets, just big enough to fit a person or a body in. There were false cabinets in the walls in various places that were clearly intended for guns and stuff. Even down in the basement there was an escape hatch and a tunnel that you could use access to the backyard from the underground ladder. I recall when I was digging holes to make a fence in the yard for my dogs, I found a buried power cable coming from the basement running a straight line straight out into the woods. To this day, I still wish I had borrowed a cable finder from work and tracked down where it went. Coworkers used to theorize it may be an old bunker with bodies inside or something crazy. Last but not least, my landowners who bought the place from the bank said the guy died in the house, and all his money was in a fridge in the basement with chains and shit locked around it. Not to mention various cans of cash and valuables buried all over the property. Weird. I described the house and the odd things about it, just to give you a concept of how my wife and I felt about the place when sleeping there at night. Now, if you've spent most of your life living in the city, or even just a small town, you may not realize it, but there's almost always some kind of sound coming from outside, maybe via cars or sirens or trains, planes. Same goes for light from streetlights and cars and whatnot. You don't know true silence and darkness until you live in the woods of Oregon, which we found out the first night there. So here we are laying in bed in our new house. The floor creaks real loud when you walk around. The cold air coming from the basement is so alarmingly cold that you throw towels down under the basement door to help keep the warm air in. You're certain you can hear the mice on the walls fighting to get inside as the winter air starts to drive critters indoor for safety and warmth. Laying in the bed in pitch-black darkness and hearing small sounds unlike anything you've ever heard or experienced before, you question how you'll ever be able to sleep and regret that you didn't finish unpacking the truck and get that damn box fan out for noise. My wife and I would talk to each other to break the silence here and there as we try to go to sleep. This goes on for about 2 hours or so, until suddenly, out of nowhere, a skin-curdling cry starts to creep up into our ears. It starts out really low at first, and you question if it's just the ringing in your head caused by the silence. You question if you should ask your wife about it, but assume that she's likely asleep, and you're just hearing shit in your head. In reality, your wife is laying there too, thinking, what the fuck is that? Now the cry starts to get a little louder. Suddenly your brain decides to sound kind of familiar. Sounds like a baby crying. For a moment, you're in complete confusion trying to make sense of how this could be happening out in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly you have goosebumps. You start to question if all the doors are locked. You think it over and over in your head many times and decide you're certain the front door is locked, but not certain you closed the hatch to the basement. I wonder why there isn't a lock on the basement door just outside your bedroom. Just as you finally start, you ask your wife if she hears it too. It jumps in volume really, really loud. Your heart leaps out of your chest, and both of you are jumping out of bed and looking at the window that faces the backyard. It's pitch black out. You can't see shit. Your dogs, herding cattle dogs, are now at the massive window in the living room barking their heads off, growling like they see something. Still can't see shit. It's just a black void out there as you look out the window in the direction of the woods. If you avoid focusing your eyes and instead try to pay attention to your peripheral vision, you can almost make out some dark shapes just at the edges of the woods about 20 feet from the back of the house. The sound, as it greatly increases in volume, sounds like a crazy mixture of a screaming baby, a didgeridoo, and a standard referee whistle all at once. Think something much like the ring wraiths in Lord of the Rings. Goes on for a few moments, getting ear-piercingly loud before dying down completely. Each time my wife and I start to attempt to gather our thoughts about what the luck, it'd be starting this up again. This lasted for roughly 30 minutes before it just stops entirely. We never hear it again that night. Needless to say, we got a very little amount of sleep that night. It wasn't until I told my landlord about it the next day that I figured out really what it was. Ask Reddit. I can't actually confirm this is paranormal, but due to the fact that there was only like one other option, it seemed paranormal at the time. This may seem like a mild, maybe even lame experience, but it really freaked us out. Now this one is rather short, not very fulfilling, but it's a story nonetheless. Every summer, my family and I travel back east to visit our extended family in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Often when we're there, we'll have other relatives come by and they'll hang out with us. One summer we were staying at my aunt's house, which had a basement, a main floor, and then an upstairs. Upstairs were 2 giant rooms, although only one of them had been finished at the time. My cousin had been given permission to stay over for the night, which I was pretty ecstatic about, considering me and him are really close friends. It was just us 2 upstairs, with our sleeping bags and whatnot. For the sake of this, I'm going to call my cousin Jack since I don't want to give out his real name. Jack and I were often the ones who went to bed last, whenever he spent the night. We'd always stay up together watching YouTube or TV and playing on our phones, normal stuff. We positioned our sleeping bags near an outlet and started to charge our phones. We took turns, since it was really only one outlet, and we wanted to make our 2 sleeping bags into one giant thing. It gets rather cold in Massachusetts nights, even in the summer. Well, we started to jokingly mess around with each other's phones. I believe it was his turn for the charger, so I moved myself to the other side of the quote-unquote bed, and he starts to shuffle around the blankets. He asked me where the charger was. I didn't know where. Probably had fallen out of the outlet. I recalled the outlets upstairs being loose and, well, got lost in the bed when we switched sides, maybe. We looked under the pillows, under the blankets, under everything, and no luck. We looked around the whole room without finding the charger. It was at that point that my aunt had knocked on the door, asked us to keep it down. The room is directly above the master bedroom, after all. We shrugged it off, headed downstairs and into the living room, decided to watch some TV to pass the time since neither of us felt tired. After a few episodes of a show that we'd like to binge together, we decided to go back upstairs and quietly look for the charger again. We tiptoed up the steps, into the room, but something was off. We slowly approached the bed until we finally saw it. The charger was on one of our pillows, out in the open. We were so close to freaking out. I know this sounds like a joke, but it actually gave us quite the startle. Ask Reddit. My sister once dated this guy whose parents kept this little carousel thing up at the top of a big dish cabinet. I assume it was maybe for Christmas, but it kind of fit there, so they left it. Even though it was pretty high up, if you walked by, it was triggered somehow and would go off. It was cute. Then it started to die and was moving really slow, and the music was kind of deranged. So they took the batteries out and just never replaced them. Every time you'd walk by after that, it still went off. Super slow and super deranged. Then it started going off when you were sitting on the couch way across the room in the living room, not even moving. Completely open rooms, you can see the entire dining room and the living room from the other side. This same house also had a strange basement. I've never had issues with basements, except this one. It was 2-sided, as in half of it was for the laundry area, and the other half was like a sitting area. I guess that was separated by a thin wall. Every single time we'd be down there, I felt watched and the hairs on my skin would stand up. Thought it was just me until my sister's boyfriend eventually moved down there. She said the same thing. It was not pleasant to sleep down there at night. Especially since they weren't allowed to leave the laundry light on, and there was no door to that room, so it looked like a giant black void at night. I'm not the only one who's felt watched in that house. So like I said, it feels tame compared to some people's experiences. However, it still freaks me out to this day, and I do still think about it. I also went to my dad's friend's house when I was real young to play with their kids while the adults hung out. I remember going up to the playroom that they had set up for the girl my age. We both sat down to play with a big plastic doll house. The ones where you could move the staircase up and down, kind of like an attic ladder. Well, we were laughing, having a good old time, until her mom walked in. I turned and said something along the lines of, "Hi, Beth and I are hungry. Can we get a snack?" She looked at me like I had two heads and asked where I'd seen her, because she'd been looking for her, because it was time for her medicine, apparently. Ask Reddit. As an elementary school kid, we had the chance to do an overnight field trip on an old wooden boat museum. It was to teach us what life was like on a boat back in the 1800s by experiencing it. We would learn sea shanties and how to haul cargo by pulling rope together, with events all led by people dressed up as sailors. They taught us how to stand and get our sea legs, knees crouched slightly all the time, and we had rat stew, chicken soup, and rationed lemonade to prevent scurvy. In retrospect, one of the most badass field trips a kid could ask for. We even had night watch shifts where we split into groups and take over and watch the horizon for a while docked. Write in journal logs on parchment with quills by candlelight, and then wake up next to the group and go back to bed. When I got up from my shift at 2 a.m., we dressed for the cold and lined up outside. I had a jacket that had the straps to seal the underside and keep warm. While we were lined up, I felt an ice-cold S drawn along my back. I looked back at the classmate who was barely even awake. When I asked him, he swore he didn't do anything, and reasonably he couldn't have. There was no access to my back. I wrote about it in my watchman's log, moved on until the next day. While we were having breakfast biscuits, s'mores, they told us a ghost story about a prankster crewmate. He was a younger kid and would draw an S on the backs of sailors and run off before they could see him. The S stood for his name, although I can't remember it now. During a storm, he fell while working on the topsails and died at sea. And the workers at this museum would talk about how sometimes he would hang around and still pranks people. Well, I mentioned what happened, and the face of our host seemed pretty shocked, wide-eyed. She looked at two coworkers before moving on and changing subjects, as if they passed the tale along for entertainment but didn't really believe in it. But I do now, I guess. I don't know how else I could have felt something so cold while being wrapped up so snug. Wind wouldn't only make a line on my back. Nobody could touch my bare back. Ask Reddit. The student center in my university used to be a restaurant and a cafeteria and a food court. It had it in its basement, with 2 sets of stairs going back to the first floor. Stories said that it was haunted, but I always thought it was a joke. I liked to study down there in the evening, because the food court was closed and all the booths were empty, and it gave me a lot of space to spread out my books and notes and have some peace and quiet. The layout was like one of the stairs was next to the booth, so sitting I could just sort of see if anybody was coming or going. The other set of stairs were behind me down a hallway that had some storage closets and restrooms. There was nothing else down that hall. So I was studying one day in the empty food court and I had to go pee. So I go down the hallway into the bathroom, motion sensing lights turn on, do my business, start washing my hands. This is when I hear a soft cough inside the restroom, as if someone was trying to get my attention. Finish washing my hands and I turn and realize the stalls are all open. I'm alone in this goddamn restroom. I briskly went to my booth and started packing my bags, and before I went up the stairs, I looked around and sure enough, there was nobody there. I started making my way up the stairs and I heard the same coughing right behind me. Seeing the movies, I didn't turn around. I also never sat down there again, even after they remodeled it. Ask Reddit. When I was struggling with heroin addiction, my mom, who's fairly religious, suggested I go to church, maybe talk to somebody there about what was going on. I was pretty close to rock bottom at the time, so I thought, well, what the hell? I'll go talk to someone. I walked to the Catholic church down the street. I'm not Catholic, but it was the closest church. I walked in. This young preacher, he was wearing all black with the collar, looked about late 20s, early 30s with brown hair and brown eyes or green eyes. Walked out into the hall. Same time I walked in, really. Introduced himself as Father Mike. He looked at me and said, "You look like something's pulling you down. Do you need to talk?" I said, "Yeah." We sat in the entry hallway and talked. We talked for about 2 hours. Everything just kind of poured out of me. I felt so comfortable with him and at peace. I talked about the addiction issues and how my life was so messed up at that point that I was thinking about killing myself to stop the cycle. He looked me in the eye with these crazy green eyes. Never seen anybody with that shade of green before. He told me, "You don't have much time left. You keep using. You're on borrowed time. There's not much of that left. Get yourself into detox and get shit together. Otherwise, you won't have to worry about taking your life." I said, "Yeah, I know. Done this a bunch of times." He cut me off and said, "I know, I'm being serious. If you don't get sober this time, you won't get another chance." When he said that, I got chills. So I thanked him for his time, called my mom, and she drove me to detox. On the way to the hospital, I told my mom about Father Mike. She said she was going to go thank him for talking with me. Fast forward about 2 weeks and my mom calls me in treatment. She says that she went to the church and asked for Father Mike. The staff said that there was nobody named Mike who worked there. There wasn't any young man with brown hair and green eyes. She asked if I was sure about Father Mike. I said I was 100%. I still remember how green his eyes were. She checked at various other churches in the area, thinking I was high, and wandered farther from the place I was staying. No one had a Father Mike, or anyone who fit his description. Mom is completely convinced that I had a run-in with my guardian angel. I wasn't so sure, but his eyes and the way he said you won't get another chance instead of you might not get another chance still gives me chills. I did go on to get sober, and I did get my life together. Ask Reddit. One night when I was 10, I was asleep in bed. I was woken up by my bedroom door opening, then someone sitting on my bed. I felt the graze on my leg and the bed sink as they sat. Thinking it was my mom having something to tell me, I opened my eyes only to see a pale, eyeless, just black empty sockets boy who seemed to be my age, sitting at the foot of my bed with his legs crossed, staring at me. Or, well, facing my direction since he had no eyes. He then reached his hand toward me. He was holding what looked like a little black box. I was freaked out, but as I reached to grab it, he hesitantly pulled back. I reached out further for it and I said, "Give it." As I did so, I blinked, and by the time I reopened my eyes, he was gone. The spot of the bed where he was sitting lifted back into place, but the imprint of somebody sitting there was still present. I told my mom in the morning. She was slightly freaked out, but assured me I was just dreaming. Fast forward 5 years, though. I had my girlfriend over to do homework. After homework, she took a nap while she waited for her parents to pick her up. When they arrived, I tried waking her to let her know. I nudged her. She opened her eyes so sudden, looking in the direction of the corner of the room where the wall meets the ceiling, lifting her finger and pointed. And as fast as she awoke, she fell asleep again. Well, I attempted to wake her up again. She came to full consciousness, and I asked her what the hell that was all about, and she explained what she just did. She said, "Oh, I thought I was dreaming, but up on the wall I saw a little boy with no eyes just there like Spider-Man pose staring at me." That's when I freaked out, told her the story. First time, really. What I saw, and what I guessed was the same kid. Fast forward another 5 years, still with the same girlfriend, and by this time we had a 2-year-old daughter. We were living in an old bedroom at my parents' house. My daughter would wake up at the same time every night and start talking. For a while, we thought it was a normal baby thing, till I noticed it was almost the same conversation every night. I playfully asked her one night who she was talking to each night. She responded, "Little boy. He talks to me. He's nice. He's lost. He's looking for his mommy." I told my mom what happened the next morning. Before I got to tell her what I thought, she said, "I remember when that happened to you. Then your girlfriend. No idea what that is." By then, neither my girlfriend or I have seen the little boy after our first encounter, but my daughter continued her nightly conversations until we got her own place later that year. Ask Reddit. We moved into a house, and everything was quiet the first 6 months or so. The neighbors told us that the people who lived there before had moved after their teenage son died in a motorcycle accident. Then after the first 6 months, my dad died. Not in the house, but after that, stuff started to happen. I would have friends sleep over, and one night my friend woke up because she had said that there was a young guy standing in my bathroom. I went and checked. No one or nothing was there. Over the next few years, just about any friends that stayed overnight had said that they saw a tall, blonde young guy walking around the house. We did have a few other things happen. Like a wine glass was on the counter and it broke. No one was touching it. It just shattered on the counter. Another time during the winter, we had a heater on. My room was always the warmest in the house, and it was ice cold as you walked across the bedroom to the bathroom I was connected to. The creepiest thing was when my boyfriend was sleeping on the couch in the middle of the night. He said he woke up to a young guy pushing him off to the floor. He said the guy didn't say anything, but my boyfriend at the time knew that he had to leave. He did. He wouldn't stay at my place after that. Gotten a lot of crap about the wine glass, so I'll explain in better detail. This is an edit. My mom had a huge collection of glassware. She had so many there wasn't anywhere to put it anymore, so we just set them on the counter. The wine glass had just been sitting there for a long time. No one had touched it, hadn't come out of the dishwasher or anything like that. Basically, she bought it, put it on the counter, never touched it again. When it broke, no one was near it. Only me and my mom, where they were both at least, I guess you could say, at least 10 feet away. Could it have been something like a crack in the glass? Maybe, but at the time it startled us and we thought it was weird. I was just sharing one of the many things that happened. Me and my girlfriend had an odd moment tonight, and I don't know what happened. This incident happened earlier this evening. Me and my girlfriend are still very confused on what it is that happened. You may or may not believe me. That's your choice. But please, someone explain what had happened if you can. Earlier this evening, me and my girlfriend were playing around. Not doing what you all think we were. But we were messing around and having fun. Something had come up about her face. Though I'm not entirely sure what had happened. So I'm gonna just apologize in advance. I had touched her face, then she covered it with her hands. Then playfully I had said, "Let me see your face." She wouldn't remove her hand from her face, so I said it again. And this time she ducked her head into her legs. Obviously, she was still playing around and we were laughing and joking this whole time. Then when she had her head tucked and her face was buried in her hands, I had whispered into her ear, "Let me see your face." That's when things got weird. I'm not exactly sure what happened next, but I feel like I know exactly what had happened at the same time, if that makes sense. I remember my eyes closing and my brain going black, and me continuing to say, "Let me see your face, let me see your face, let me see your face, show me your face. You know you want to." Talking really fast and whispering. And this was all into her ear. I do remember for some reason really wanting to see her face before this happened. Like I said before, I barely remember this. But at the same time, I do. It just didn't feel like me. Then when I'd finally come back to my senses, caught myself doing it, and my girlfriend was freaking out still in the same position she was before. She was breathing really heavily and rocking back and forth. And I asked her if she was okay. She took a bit to respond, but eventually said that she was fine. She had told me after that she blacked out too. She couldn't hear me talking. Then her brain went blank. It's like she was there, but wasn't at the same time. Very similar to what I was feeling, honestly. I know it sounds like she had a panic attack, but what was really strange is that almost right after she responded to me, she was completely fine. Out of it, of course, because of the confusion, but calm. After that happened, I got really freaked because I didn't even feel like it was me talking. Felt like something else was there and I was watching. Phone ringing in cemetery. I'm in my 20s. I lost my father in a car accident at the age of 6. This month was his birthday month. I still visit his gravestone often, but this time I went together with my girlfriend at dark. I had no other options due to work. We went to replace the flowers. Right before we finish, an old telephone ringing sound goes off, like actual classic ringing of a wired old telephone. Both instantly get this disgusting, nauseous feeling of dread. Our first instinct was to get out. There's no lanterns there, so it was all flashlights. No other visitors. Important factor is that we both heard it, loud and clear. I've never suddenly felt so sick and cold as I have then. Later, when driving home, I changed my mind. Thinking it might have been him trying to contact me, we went back. Armed with a shovel, a knife, and flashlights, we went through the whole cemetery in the area where the ringing came from. Nothing. No houses, no people, nothing. thinking I might have missed something, went to check on Google Maps, but the direction it came from had no houses close to it at all. I don't expect people here to have answers, but I sure hope that this place is like something I can share. Well, I surely hope that this is the place, meaning Reddit, is the place where I can share such an experience, as most of my relatives laugh it off as a ha 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 ha, he said thanks. My dad's accident still is a very touchy subject for me compared to my siblings, as I knew him the best, being the oldest of the three. And this event didn't help me out one bit. If someone's interested, I've had some more strange things happen in regard to my dad, but at my parents' house. Nothing since I have my own house, though.